Hey there, you're watching Bare Knuckle Binder. Welcome to the channel. Today, shit. Hey there, you're watching Bare Knuckle Binder. Welcome to the channel. Today, I've got something I'm really excited about. I've been working on it for a while. If you're watching this, you are probably interested in old trucks and old motors and stuff. I love old trucks. I love working on old motors. I love keeping them old or period correct as much as I can. That said, there are some things about these trucks that could stand a little bit of improvement. If we're talking from the straight technical standpoint, oil filtration is king. These vintage motors, this truck is 75 years old. The filtration is completely subpar to what is available today. It's one of the reasons that old vehicles wore out so much faster, old motors. When you see somebody with an old motor or an old car and saying, oh, this only has 30,000 original miles, a car with 30,000 miles on it in the 40s is pretty much toast. There was time to rebuild the motor. Now with modern oils, modern engines, and especially modern oil filtration, you can go so much further. The main point of what I'm trying to get across today, and what this project is going to achieve, is to convert an old motor that uses bypass filtration to full flow filtration. Now, bypass filtration, what does that mean? So think of it, I'm trying to explain this really simply if you don't know what I'm talking about. The oil pump on this truck pumps to a port on the block. There's 3 ports. The base of the oil filter covers all these ports, and there's routing in the base of the oil filter that directs the oil to where it needs to go. Now, bypass filtration means that it's almost like the oil filtration is an afterthought. The oil pump pumps directly to the engine bearings, and then with the back pressure of that oil, some goes to the bypass filter. Today's cars use full flow filtration, which means the oil pump pumps oil that goes directly to an oil filter first. Why is that important? So your oil is in the sump, or the oil pan. Pumps the oil through the motor, it hits your main bearings, it hits your rockers, it hits every point in the motor that needs to be lubricated, and then it dumps back into the sump. However you want to think of it, the sump is just the supply of oil. When you pull oil from the sump, it's considered dirty oil because it's circulated the motor and it's back in the sump. Ideally, your pump would want to filter that before it sends it through the motor, because that's where all the particles are going to settle from circulating the motor. Yes, it lubricates the motor, but it also carries contaminants and small metal parts, everything that all travels back to the sump. So anything that's in the oil is going to be in the sump, and if you don't filter it out first, it's going to be going through your motor. So a bypass filter, the reason why it's so inferior and it's worth replacing in an old truck like this is because anything that's in your sump is going directly to your main bearings first. And that's the heart of your motor. You know, that's like the #1 lubrication point. And if you're sending contaminants and stuff to those main bearings, you're going to have to rebuild your motor sooner than later. Giving credit where credit is due, not to divert from YouTube or being in the shop right now. This is a topic that I posted about in the Binder Planet forums. I wanted to know if there was a conversion kit for full flow filters for these motors. In the 50s, when everyone started going to full flow on motors, they sold them as a conversion kit. But basically, all it was a filter and a base. This motor, in its many forms and variations, was used in a lot of different trucks. And in the 50s, when they had full flow as an option for these motors, these were not able to be retrofitted with those filters because we were so big that the clearance in this truck you'll see it when we get in there, is too tight. It left these trucks being only outfitted with a bypass filter. My forum name on Binder Planet is Yorick, Y-O-U-R-I-C. It was a nickname I had when I was a kid. If you want to look up that forum topic, cool. You'll find out how this topic came to be and how it evolved and how we got to the point where we're at right now, which is a point where I'm going to show you my take on what I think would work really well for this.
You can't so easily just plunge it, but there's 100,000. Just a rough hand job there.
I had one of those before.
Yeah. But it worked, right?
Yeah, got the job done.
Don't make me laugh. Trying to turn two handles at the same time here. All right.
This is the stock filter for this truck. The name for this is a military senior filter, and that's just that in World War II, this was the larger filter that the military used in all their vehicles. It made it really easy if everything used the same filter. However, this is for this international motor, the Red Diamond. So, turning it over, this is how it routes oil from the block. The oil pump pumps out at a port that feeds in right here. There's a port right here at the motor block that feeds to the oil galley, goes right to the main bearings. Fluid under pressure finds the path of least resistance, so it routes immediately the port from the oil pump directly to the port to the motor. How the bypass filtration works, on the back pressure pushing back from the main bearings, it pushes this oil back into here. The filter, oil goes through the filter, comes back, and feeds out here. Now, this is called a sump outlet. This goes directly back into the oil pan. So you have this oil mainly going into the motor from the pump over to the galley, but then you're also getting stuff going through the oil filter and coming out the sump return. Now, this guy right here is your oil pressure relief. Your oil pressure is regulated so that on cold starts, when the oil's thicker than normal operating temperature, it's not like blowing out filters or whatever. So on these trucks, I think it's set at 40 or 45. So it'll push on this. This is a piston with a spring. When it pushes this back, the excess pressure comes back out the sump return. That's what you need to know about this. And this I've come up with as an adapter to move this to a full flow setup. Oil comes from the pump, goes directly to the out. This feeds out to the filter, comes back out here, feeds down straight into the galley. The stock guts for this valve go right into here. There's this cap plug, copper washer, a spring, and a 3/4 inch piston. That's how this valve works. With the length of this bore and the tension of this spring, presets this to 45 pounds. I think it's 45 pounds. Now, there's slightly shorter bore in this one because I'm trying to raise the pressure. My plan originally had an adjustable external pressure relief valve, but it just turned into too much plumbing for my taste. So with all this routing, this so now you have a pressure relief valve right here. I have not tried this on the truck yet. That's what we're doing tonight. Made my gasket here. I think this will work perfectly. Oh, I missed a bolt hole there. So this is the filter base. That replaces this part of the filter. Now, the filter itself, this is the send, goes directly out to the full flow. This is a return coming back from the filter. This is the new filter, or actually the filter hanger. Here's our main full flow filter. Hey, beautiful. The bypass filter. .7 absolute efficiency at 2 microns. Look at those pretty Amsoil stickers. Dang. So there's going to be this setup hanging in the motor bay somewhere. We're gonna find that real estate here in a minute. But we'll have hoses running from here to these ports here. So we're gonna rig that up too. Quick history lesson in relation to modern things that we're doing right now. I'm routing oil very easily and efficiently using these modern AN style fittings. We're working on a World War II vehicle. AN in AN fittings, or dash fittings as they're also known. AN stands for Army Navy, and they were developed in World War II. And to cross lines even more, I have an international mechanical oil pressure gauge made for the KB series of trucks for the military. See how that looks different than the electrical gauges that you see. It's got different numbers. But they're on the back. Look at that little AN fitting. We're not putting this on the truck today, but just a little bit of hardcore vintage truck nerdery. Let's get this guy on the truck and make sure it fits. And second, we'll figure out a place to put this. So here we are, sitting up on the fender, looking down into the motor. Get some light on this. Please excuse my mess right now. A lot of this is some experimentation while I'm messing around with this truck and getting it where I want it to be. Here we got our military senior filter. Filter base is down there. This here is a steering box, so you can see how it's right in the way there. So we gotta get this guy off of here and put a fancy aluminum block on there. Little dude just snoozing. It's a good time to drain the oil since we're gonna put some brand new Amsoil stuff in here. Okay, right now we're looking down on where the oil filter mounts to this. We got right here, this is the hole coming from the oil pump. And you can see the shadow, the witness marks, where this is where the oil goes to the galley. And then this here is your sump return. This stud right here, this is really helpful with the military senior filter because it's a heavy filter, and when you're putting it on, the stud acts as an alignment, but also it'll hold the weight of the filter while you're bolting it on there. However, we have a lightweight block of aluminum. I don't think this will clear the flanges on the adapter block. So we gotta get her off of there. All right, so we gotta get this stud out of here. So we gotta double nut it. It's not a euphemism, by golly, it's a technique. Tell you what the problem is here. It's this plug. This plug on the bottom is causing these problems. So let's try this again. All right, I got it all tightened in there. Pretty happy with it. It's extremely on there. So now I have to figure out where to hang these filters. These 4 bolts here, some 3/8 flat stock or whatever I got out back. The hanger would bolt right on there and they'd hang right here. Let me grab them real quick. Up here, run hoses all the way up there. Warren's gonna have to find a new home. Here I've mocked up a stand for the oil filters here. Our adapter's down there covered in a rag right now. And I'll go back through here in a while and clean it all up and paint it and whiz wheel off the extra bolt threads, but I think that looks good. It's really sturdy. I went and welded the angle iron that I had mounted my horn to just because this angle will give this a little more rigidity. So now let's put the horn on there and make some hoses for this oil filter. One thing I want to talk about real quick, these AN fittings here, these are AN8. However, these are JIC fittings and they're much bigger, so I had to get adapters for them. JIC and AN fittings are basically the same, but I think there's something about the tolerances with JIC fittings. I'm sure a quick Google search could explain it much better than I can, but I just want to let you know we're about to put some reducers on here and then some elbows. But I also have, for this one, I have a ported adapter, so I'll show you what that is. So these are adapters, and they reduce down to AN8 fittings so that we have matching fittings on the filter and the base. So I just had these mocked up here. They're just finger tight. As you see, it's kind of getting, there's a little bit of room here, so, but we're getting tight on space. Anyway, this ported fitting, see now, that ported fitting gives me the option to put a pressure gauge right here, so while I'm doing a cold startup I can see exactly what the pressure is. Got the hoses done, got everything set up and tightened. Filter adapter down there, looking sharp. Pressure readout gauge here. Horn back on, of course. And I've got my Amsoil bypass filter and full flow filter set up. So I have to add new oil, and I have to fill these filters with oil so that I don't have to wait for this, truck to fill up these filters before it hits the motor, so it'll just be easier on the bearings. Once I get these filters filled and oil in the crankcase again, I'm actually going to turn the motor over and just make sure that I have oil coming out of the send output here, just to be safe. After all this work, putting in the best oil filter system that money can buy, it just wouldn't do to put some cheap oil in this thing, so anything worth doing is worth overdoing. So here I am with some Amsoil 15W40. Now, obviously this is a gas motor, and this is diesel oil, but that really doesn't mean anything. So it's just made for heavy duty motors, of which this is one. So cool. Quick thing about this pressure gauge up here. You may ask, why would I have a pressure gauge out here when I've got one in the cab? And it's just for the sake of having it right here where you would be adjusting the pressure anyway. On this setup, no matter what, you can't just eliminate the pump pressure relief valve. But we want to, in a full flow setup, you actually want it set a little higher. So the bore is actually shorter on this adapter. If we need more pressure, we can actually shim the spring on the inside. And if we need less pressure, we can actually cut the spring or put washers on that cap. When we fire it up, we're gonna be watching the pressure gauge here, the pressure gauge here, to see what it reads. If it's at 50, I'll be happy. If it's between 55 and 65, I'll be very happy. Like I said, I'm going to crank the motor over with the ignition off just to make sure that I'm getting oil coming out of the main out from the pump. If we're good there, then I'm going to fire it up. If you have one of these and it still has the original solenoid, there's a plunger on the bottom of it here that will actually crank the motor over from here. So let's see. Now we're watching this guy right here to see if oil bubbles up out of it. So try to hold the light and hit the plunger and stay out of your way. Dang, there it is. Look at all that oil. Cool. Let me clean up this mess and we'll start the truck. All right, so that should have oil going through the lines. Let's turn on some ignition here and see what I get on this pressure gauge. So there you have it, y'all. Homemade adapter made out of billet aluminum. Running up to a Amsoil remote filtering and bypass filter setup. So this truck started out with basically the worst oil filter you could put on it, which is like almost a step up from nothing to having the best oil filter that I'm aware of that money can buy. So you'll notice when I started it up and I revved it, first off you'll notice that there's a miss in it. We're gonna deal with that in another episode. But it would get up to about 50 and it would kind of wobble. That was the pump relief, the oil pressure relief valve working. So it works. I might shim the spring inside that valve just to get a little more pressure, but I am really happy with how this has turned out. I am happy that my truck is actually getting clean oil, and like I said before, Amsoil claims that running this filter setup is similar to changing the oil in your truck every 10 to 15 minutes that it's running. So pretty stoked about that. Anyway, thanks for watching, and like and subscribe if you dig this kind of stuff. If you have any questions about how to work on these trucks, any questions about, you know, the right way to do something or a really handy wrong way to do it, post it in the comments, ask me a question. I'd be happy to answer anything I can. So